Adjusting for Fishing 2, the theoretical foundation. What is the standard adjusting for Fishing 2? It refers to the original concept of adjusting for meshes and fishing 2 meshes. This may sound a bit redundant, but the standard adjusting for Fishing 2 has specific requirements for the adjusted meshes, bait weight, and fishing meshes. Most anglers think this float adjustment method is useless, yet you still have to learn it. It's quite interesting that once you master float adjustment, you'll find what you initially learned seems useless. This is because the so-called standard adjusting for Fishing 2 exists only in ideal states, just like the various formulas we learned in school, which mostly apply to ideal conditions. 1. Standard adjusting for Fishing 2. The standard adjusting for Fishing 2 is not simply adjusting to 4 meshes and fishing at 2 meshes. It roughly has several requirements. First, adjust the float to 4 meshes in mid-water. Moreover, the weight of the double bait needs to be equivalent to 2 meshes. That is, when weighing the bait at this time, the float should still show 2 meshes remaining. Then, hang the double bait and adjust the position of the float seat to fish at 2 meshes. Is this the so-called standard adjusting for Fishing 2? Some anglers will definitely say that this is fishing in suspension and there's no way to confirm whether the fishing tackle is touching the bottom. The state of the standard adjusting for Fishing 2 is that the lower bait touches the bottom, or there's a minimal gap from touching the bottom, while the upper bait is suspended in mid-water. It's also claimed to be the most sensitive state for bottom fishing. How to achieve this state? Forget about it if the bottom of the water is uneven, as changes in bait weight will also have an impact. So, this is a theory under relatively ideal conditions. Hang the double bait and start finding the bottom. First, don't fish at 2 meshes but at 3 meshes. According to the float adjustment theory, the fishing tackle must be touching the bottom at this point. Then, on this basis, adjust the position of the float seat little by little, from fishing at 3 meshes back to 2 meshes, and that's roughly this ideal state. Is this float adjustment method useful? It can be said to be both useful and useless. It's useful because the theories of float adjustment all stem from this. It's useless because once you understand float adjustment, this sensitive or insensitive state is, first of all, not applicable, and second, impossible to find. 2. Theory. It should be noted here that the earliest popular adjusting for Fishing 2 was mainly used for catching crucian carp, especially in aquaculture ponds. Rubbed bait was used, and the float was a soft-tipped float. So, for the soft tip, the double bait could roughly press down about 2 meshes. From today's perspective, isn't fishing in a still water aquaculture pond easy? However, it was found at that time that the fish catch rate in this state was very high, so it gradually became popular. What conclusions can we draw? First, regarding the formula for finding the bottom, if you adjust to 4 meshes and there are still 2 meshes left when hanging double bait in mid-water, then it's better to fish a little more than 2 meshes if you want to fish the bottom. It can also be understood that when the number of meshes of the fishing tackle is greater than the number of meshes with bait in mid-water, the fishing tackle must be touching the bottom. Confirming that the tackle is touching the bottom is not just the result of adjusting the float seat to make the water line longer, but rather the number of meshes on the float increases. Only when the fishing tackle touches the bottom will the bottom of the water offset part of the weight of the tackle, and the pull on the float seat will decrease, so the number of meshes increases, indicating that it has reached the bottom. This is the correct way to find the bottom. For example, if you use adjusting 4, fishing 2 with rubbed bait for bottom fishing, after changing to earthworms, it may not reach the bottom, even though the length of the water line hasn't changed. This is because when the bait weight is insufficient, the fishing line will slacken. Then, there is a reliable formula for finding the bottom: fishing meshes, adjusted meshes, bait weight. This formula also tells us that when fishing the bottom, it's best to weigh the bait so that we know at least how many meshes to fish to be fishing the bottom. It also tells us that if we change the bait, it's best to reweigh the bait. It also tells us the conclusion that with the same adjusted meshes and fishing meshes, different bait weights result in different sensitivity, different states, and completely different fish catch rates. In fact, float adjustment also needs to consider hook weight. When adjusting to a high mesh and fishing at a low mesh, you need to consider bait weight. When adjusting to a low mesh and fishing at a high mesh, you need to consider hook weight. Otherwise, you won't even know if the lead sinker is touching the bottom. Author profile: I'm a self-media blogger who loves fishing and is good at sharing. Follow me, and we'll exchange fishing skills and discuss every little detail of wild fishing for anglers. Give a like, save it, and follow to never miss the next update.